Analysis of Bayonet Charge by Ted Hughes for the GCSE Literature exam. Bayonet Charge. Suddenly he was awoke and was running, raw in raw-seamed hot khaki, his sweat heavy, stumbling across a field of clods towards a green hedge that dazzled with rifle fire, hearing bullets smacking the belly out of the air. He lugged a rifle numb as a smashed arm, the patriotic tear that had brimmed in his eyes sweating like molten iron from the centre of his chest. In bewilderment then he almost stopped. In what cold clockwork of the stars and the nations was he the hand pointing that second? He was running like a man who has jumped up in the dark and runs listening between his footfalls for the reason of his still running, and his foot hung like statuary in mid-stride. Then the shot slashed furrows threw up a yellow hair that rolled like a flame and crawled in a threshing circle, its mouth wide open, silent, its eyes standing out. He plunged past with his bayonet towards the green hedge. King, honour, human dignity, etc. dropped like luxuries in a yelling alarm to get out of that blue, crackling air, his terror's touchy dynamite. Okay, so analysing this poem with flirts, form, language, imagery, rhythm, rhyme, tone and subject. We are starting with subject, and this poem is written by Ted Hughes describing the thoughts and feelings of an unnamed soldier as he charges an enemy position in World War I. Now the form. It begins again in medias res, just like Charge of the Light Brigade and just like Belfast Confetti is mentioned in those videos that I've done. There are three stanzas. Two of them have 8 lines, so the first and third stanza has 8 lines and the second has 7. The first and third are full of action, yet the second slows right down. So initially, with it beginning in medias res, remember in medias res, a Latin term in the middle of something, shows that we are again plunged into the actions, but more significant in this is that the soldier himself is kind of plunged in the middle of an action. He's started charging without thought. It's instinctual, and then he has a realization. Suddenly he awoke, and that reflects this sudden realization of what he is doing. The first stanza is full of action. It describes the soldier running in the heat of battle. However, in the second stanza, this slows right down, and you can see that in lines like statuary in mid-stride, etc., etc. But this shows how he is more contemplative. He is thinking his actions through. He's realised what he is doing, and now he's not working on instinct, but he's thinking. It's careful reflection on what he's doing, and I think that the stanza is shorter to emphasize this change in the focus. Now the language. We have the use of the third person pronoun, he, his. We have the alliteration of H in the early part of the poem, and then we have these verbs showing a regressive action in that it's going back, it's degenerating, running, stumbling, lugged, statuary and plunged. And then we have these grand themes in the final stanza, and they are dismissed with the etc. So the use of third person pronouns show that the soldier is anonymous. Tennyson isn't focusing on one particular soldier. We are thinking about the soldiers in general. So he represents. So it's much more of a universal figure. The poem focuses on one individual, but we're not supposed to take that literally. We're not supposed to be just thinking about the one soldier. We look at how this represents the many soldiers that fought and died in World War I. The alliterative words at the beginning, so the use of the H, represents the heavy breathing and the exertion, but also the adrenaline, the excitement and the fear of the soldier. Now, what I think is interesting is the language, is the verbs, and how, as the poem progresses, his movements break down, his movements degenerate as he is slowly realizing what he's doing. he's charging an enemy gun. He's charging with a bayonet, and he's charging a rifle fire. So it starts off with him running, and we see immediately that that degenerates into a stumble. And the third line, then he's lugging. Okay, again that's a breakdown movement. Lugged a rifle. He is statuary on line 15, so he's stationary. He's stood still, and then in line 19 he plunged past with his bayonet, and plunged as a movement suggests no control over his actions at all. And in line 20 we see these words that full of the grandeur of conflict. We are fighting for a monarch, king, honour, human dignity, and then they are dismissed. These are all considered justifications for war, yet they are dismissed with the etc. The speaker can't be bothered to finish the line. Almost, he can't be bothered to finish listing them. And also the soldier himself, he no longer values these notions of conflict anymore. The imagery. We have images of nature. Ted Hughes often uses nature in his poems, and these are juxtaposed. These are placed alongside violent images. Remember, juxtaposition is the placing alongside of words, of themes, of images, and they can complement each other or they can contrast. And here we have nature and violent as a contrasting image. That's not to say that violence is absent from nature, but we see that in this particular poem there is a contrast. We have a clock metaphor that can be sometimes a bit difficult for students to grasp at first, and I think this clock metaphor symbolises the grander scale, the countries, the nations, and the universe. And then we have a simile, like a man who has jumped up in the dark. It's a man running with no purpose. The juxtaposition of the natural images and the violence indicates the effect of war, the effect of conflict on the natural world. It's a disruptive force in the world, and it's a disruptive force on the surroundings. The natural clods, the field of clods. This would have been a farming field. Of course, many of the battlefields in the First World War were farms, and they have gone back to farms, as we've seen in Mamet's Wood. And then the hare, again, it's a natural image, but it turns into death. It turns into something, to represent death in that final stanza. Now we have the clock metaphor representing the universe without emotion, a cold clockwork, cold machine. It just highlights how the universe is continuing to exist. The universe is permanent. The universe continues, yet life will not. The soldier is mortal, and he will die eventually, whether in this bayonet charge, whether in the First World War, or whether he dies in old age. He will die, yet the universe continues. And this shows how the soldier is contemplating this, almost like Wilfred Owen in Futility is contemplating the meaning of existence. The clock continues to tick, yet the individual, the soldier, is just an insignificant part of this process. It's just the hand pointing at that second, just doing something at that point, driving the universe on. Of course, on the flip side of that, it still shows that whilst the person might be insignificant, yet they still have a part to play in the universe. They still have a part to play in that's the second hand, the minute hand, and the hour hand in a clock. They might have signify different things, and the smallest of cogs and the largest of cogs, yet still they play an important part in the operating of the clock. And so do we. Whilst we might be insignificant, we still have a part to play in the operation of the universe. Now, the simile of the man, who is like a man who has jumped up in the dark and runs, listening between his footfalls for the reason of his still running. It shows that that he's not got a clear direction. Yes, he is running towards the enemy guns and so forth, but he's not thinking these things through, and he's just kind of blindly running, almost blindly running. Because of his orders, because of his patriotism, that might be. Yet the soldier is questioning himself. He is questioning for the justification, for the reason of the conflict. Okay, listening for the reason of his still running. So yes, he's lacking direction and running on instinct, but he is also questioning the reason of conflict, and he is unable to find it. And I think that Hughes is commenting on the lack of reason, the lack of thought, the lack of a rationale in conflict. Now, the rhythm and rhyme, it's written in free verse. There is a lot of use of enjambment and caesura. Again, these are terms you should be familiar with, but I will go back over them again. So the free verse identifies the lack of order, the lack of structure, and that this is just an emotional and instinctual charge. It's not one that has any rhyme or reason, to quote Shakespeare. The longer lines show how he is rushing towards the enemy, and then there are shorter lines, as you can see in the poem just by looking at it. There's this not necessarily alternating between the two, but there are some longer lines and there are some shorter. The shorter lines indicate his hesitation and his thought process and the contemplation of his fate. Enjambment is and caesura, these are important rhythmic devices. Enjambment means no punctuation at the end of the line. Okay, so in that first stanza, the first line indeed, raw seemed, the first line flows directly into the second line. You can see that line 15, stanza 2, then the shot slashed furrows through upper yellow hair. There's no punctuation at the end of furrows, so it goes immediately into the third stanza. Caesura, on the other hand, is a break in the rhythm. It's a break in the rhythm, so when the rhythm is disrupted. And we see that again in that same line, that line 15, statuary in mid-stride, full stop. Then the shot slashed furrows through up a yellow hair. So that would be a good line to quote in terms of rhythm and rhyme and show the use of enjambment and caesura in the one line. And they emphasize the contrast of his movement and his hesitation, this stop-start. And it's interesting, of course, that there's caesura there in the after, statuary in mid-stride. Stop. Then the shot slash furrow. So when it's described, when we have that image of him like a statue, we have the caesura, which lets the reader pause, which lets us pause in the rhythm. The lack of fluid rhythm shows this internal conflict in the soldier between his duty and his emotions and his fears. Now the tone, we have images of patriotism and the justifications of war that I've spoken to, but it's contrasted with this hellish image, the molten iron, the furnace of hell, and of course that is the heat and of his sweat and the heat of his chest, his heart pumping and so on. And then we have these reasons for war: king, honor, human dignity, etc., dropped like luxuries. And then in those final lines, get out of that blue crackling air, his terror's touchy dynamite. So we have that's a metaphor there, his terror's touchy dynamite. So his emotion, his fear has become explosive. And so fear, which is a human emotion, and then it itself has become a weapon. So he's lost his humanity. We see the conflict of the man's thoughts and actions in the heat of battle, the justifications of patriotism, juxtaposed with his sweat and his fear and his this adrenaline, which I talked about, and his heart pumping and beating in his chest, exploding in his chest almost. And this also extends in as I said, an infernal image, a hellish image. The final lines, these grand themes of warfare, they're ignored in place of pure instinctual self-preservation. Okay, he just wants to get out. He just wants to get out alive, and his fear, therefore, has become a weapon. This explosive fear, and he therefore no longer retains his humanity. I think that Hughes is clearly critical of war, and I think he's explored its devastating and its dehumanizing effect on those affected by it firsthand.